Your first time watching My Hero Academia, I'm sure there were moments where you were thinking, bro, you have the strongest power in the verse. Use it! And that's exactly what this what if is going to be. Every single moment that the original Izuku got scared or felt as if he wasn't enough is going to be replaced by a cocky, powerful Chad of a man Izuku who now is going to be able to actually control his powers that he was gifted by the Superman of his verse. So if you're excited for that, make sure to stick around to the end of the video, seeing as there's going to be a ton of funny moments in this video, and there's also going to be a ton of boring ones too. Anyways though, that said, you didn't hear that last part. Enjoy the video, share it with a friend, leave a like as it helps it do a ton in the algorithm. Seriously, it helps so much. And with that out of the way, enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
Okay, so we start his perspective when Izuku's born. I'm kidding. Okay, no, seriously. We started off after Izuku pretty much runs into the battlefield and ends up essentially saving Bakugo from the sludge villain. And I say saving in quotations, right? But Deku does go in there, you know, he impresses All Might, and All Might bestows one for all to Deku after the 10 harsh months of training. Let's say that this time around, Izuku's body pretty much remains constant just as it would in the original, except when Izuku's actually gifted the power of one for all, instead of Izuku's body remaining the same, it's almost as if his body kind of has this reaction to the quirk, where his muscles bulge to 2 times the size of what he was, and he even grows taller in and of itself. Izuku looks at All Might and he can see the ripped physique that he now currently has, and he would go on to ask All Might if this is how one for all works, as All Might would say that he didn't think that was, but I mean, it happened this time. So Izuku just looks to All Might and says, "All right, All Might, I'll see you there." He runs off and All Might just screams, "Wait, young Midoriya, don't use one." But he doesn't even get to say it, and he's like, the kid will figure it out himself. He goes to UA, and Izuku goes on to take the written portion, with Bakugo staring at him the entire time, seeing as now Izuku's now a confident, like 6 feet tall, and Bakugo is now looking up at Izuku instead of down. Not only that, but Izuku got so muscular that Izuku is honestly towering over Bakugo in every way, shape, and form. And with power comes not great responsibility, but bitches. And that's exactly what Deku's going to be pretty much getting in this verse. Right, so basically what ends up essentially happening is Izuku goes on to pretty much go towards the robot portion, right? When he sees Uraraka terrified, he walks over towards her direction, and Ida stops him just like he would in canon. Izuku looks at him and asks him why he's stopping him, and Ida goes on to tell him that, you know, he can't distract people. Izuku quickly apologizes to this and then waits towards the back, not realizing that he shouldn't let some chump talk to him that way. But, you know, he's gonna let it slide because he's used to that, right? But it basically, what ends up happening following this is essentially Izuku is kind of just waiting, right? He runs into the area, and it's at this moment that he begins to look around, looking for any robots he could potentially destroy. When he sees one, he immediately jumps out of the way, and Naval Laser is there to save him by shooting a beam at the robot and causing Izuku to pretty much land on the ground with rubble on him. Eventually, the whole entire time goes by, and Izuku pretty much just sat there wondering, what? Like, I got no points, right? Until eventually he hears rumbling and everybody starts running away. Cue Izuku's first badass moment. Izuku then immediately turns to the direction of the 0-pointer, and when he sees Uraraka trapped under some rubble, he immediately starts moving on his own. He jumps up into the air and lifts his arm back. He closes his eyes for just a second as he then looks towards the direction of the 0-pointer and looks at his legs, and he's flying. Izuku yanks his arm back and then says, "Smash!" As he does so, he shoots the 0-pointer as far as he possibly can, and then blitzes down to the ground and touches down without any injuries whatsoever, as he blitzes at Uraraka and holds her up by her waist, as he then asks her if she's okay. She nods, and Izuku then immediately realizes that he needs robot points. So he immediately goes on to blitz at like 5 or something robots, all 5 3-pointers, right? And he immediately destroys them, pretty much busting through them with his fist at speeds that not even the cameras could keep up with. As finally, President Mike would say, "That's it, that's it, that's it." And Izuku would end up amassing a grand total of 15 hero points. and 60 rescue points, giving him a grand score of 75 points, just 2 points behind Bakugo's original score, which would have been 77. And you'll see why I did that. Realistically, Izuku probably could have killed like 15 more, but there's no reason for him to do that. That said, he ends up getting in and everybody would look at him just astonished. Izuku's not really sure what to do since he's never really been used to all this attention, and he runs away very, very shy. This is basically going to be one of his very last weirdo moments, but when he does end up running away and going back home, he simply waits for the next couple of days, until eventually he gets his acceptance letter from UA and All Might asks to meet him on the beach. When he does so, All Might would tell Izuku that he's proud of him, that he reminds him of himself when he first got the quirk, and tells Izuku not to go all out too much with that quirk, seeing as it's very, very powerful, to try to hold back a bit. Izuku nods to All Might and tells him that he'll do his best, and All Might just smiles as he then coughs out blood and goes Plus ultra, young Midoriya. Izuku looks towards the direction of All Might and says, right, All Might, as he pretty much ends up going back home, and the first day of school would be right around the corner. It's at this point that Izuku goes to the classroom. Basically what ends up happening is he meets his sensei Aizawa. He also sees Bakugo, who berates him for a second and tells him that just because he got muscles now doesn't mean he's gonna make it as a hero. Izuku looks to Bakugo and simply thinks to himself, yeah sure, just muscles, huh? If only he knew. As suddenly, Aizawa reveals himself and then all of them find themselves standing outside as Bakugo's thrown the ball and he ends up throwing it screaming, die! As this is all happening, Izuku's basically in the background just watching the incredible display of power from Bakugo, being shocked as he thinks he could probably top that, and suddenly Aizawa then pretty much begins the rest of the tests. Izuku goes on to pretty much destroy every single other person's score at everything, even the ball thrower, going on to get an infinity himself, just like Uraraka would, pretty much destroying all of Bakugo's scores in every single event and leading Bakugo to feel utterly helpless, not knowing how Izuku got so strong in such a short amount of time, but Izuku isn't even going to tell him anything, seeing as he doesn't have to. Izuku then finally, when class ends, would be pretty much pushed by Bakugo into some alleyway where he would then begin to ask him, so Deku, answer the question, how'd you get so strong? He flares an explosion at Deku's face, and Deku holds Bakugo's arm, gripping it with force, as he then says, Bakugo, I'm not going to be your punching bag anymore. Gripping the hand, he then punches Bakugo one good time in the face, sending him crashing into the street, actually breaking his nose, leading Bakugo to have to go to Recovery Girl, and Izuku to then pretty much jump from building to building until he makes his way home. Izuku would think, did I really just do that? When he makes his way home and he ends up looking at Inko, who's pretty much just sitting there cooking. She's whipping it up in the kitchen and she's doing her thing. And Izuku's just thinking to himself, whatever. Bakugo will get over it. I'm sure he started it, right? He's just thinking that to himself, trying to justify what it is that he had just done. And essentially Inko would call him down for some food. He does so, and about 2 days would go by when suddenly the class would find themselves in the final period of the day, hero training, when suddenly a large behemoth of a man would walk in with the name All Might as he just, stands in there, and the whole class pretty much loses their mind. They begin cheering All Might, and suddenly he goes on to say his iconic catchphrase, followed by, if you're gonna be a hero, you gotta look like one, and I think that the clothes make the pros, as he unveils all their costumes, and the iconic My Hero Academia music plays in the background as all of them step out to the limelight, only to choose their partners and their opponents for the Heroes versus Villains event. It's at this moment that all of them would begin to look at each other and have fun as they're all pretty much enjoying their time, and suddenly Izuku would realize he's going to be fighting Bakugo. Bakugo would look at him with an angry, expression and a little bit of hatred in his eyes as he's wondering how Izuku got so strong. Deku didn't even tell him that thing about, All Might's quirk being not even his own, so Bakugo doesn't even know about that. So it's kind of a different scenario than what we had ended up getting in canon. So essentially what ends up pretty much happening in this time around is essentially Deku goes on to pretty much talk with Uraraka a bit, and once she realizes that they're kind of rivals, she says she's going to do her best to help Izuku. He smiles at her and then goes on to explain to her that, she shouldn't worry, that he can handle it all on his own. And Uraraka would say, oh, I know. Your performance in the entrance exam was incredible. Izuku looks at her and says, thanks, before he then pretty much starts blushing a bit. And, she turns her head to the side, holding her hands, like kind of squeezing, her assets together as she looks at Izuku and says, problem? And Izuku just looks at her like pretty much flustered as he just jumps back and says, no. Eventually, All Might would go onto the speakers and tell them to get started. As Bakugo rushes down the hallway screaming, Deku! He comes in, explosions blaring as Deku's pretty much just chilling in the second floor with Uraraka, and he suddenly sees Bakugo moving in almost slow motion. Full Cowling 100% activates, and Izuku blitzes behind Bakugo, who would look around wondering where Izuku went. Deku bumps him in the back and says, over here. And right as Bakugo turns, Deku hits him with that mean hook that sends him crashing through the building and sends him flying all the way to the outside areas of the building, sending him crashing onto the ground where he pretty much breaks a couple of bones. And All Might is like, Izuku, restrain yourself. Uraraka is pretty much like shocked at what just happened, and Izuku then goes up to the bomb room where he goes off to speed blitz Ida and then tell Uraraka to go touch the bomb. She does so, and it's pretty much told to everybody that the hero team won. Suddenly after this, Bakugo would be rushed to Recovery Girl once again, and it would be this kind of funny iconic trope that's now going on where Izuku's just like enjoying his time. Does that make sense? He's just beating on Bakugo and pretty much getting his get back for all the things that Bakugo had done to him over the years. It's not as evil as it sounds. Actually, it kind of is, but it is what it is. Bakugo asked for it from doing all the horrible things that he had done to Izuku in the past. So who are we going to blame? The bully or the kid who's just doing his best to get back at him? I mean, it's a little bit of a 50-50, I guess. More or less 25-75. That said, though, what basically goes on to happen after this is about 1 week later, they all find themselves in the USJ bus, essentially getting ready to go to the USJ. I don't know why I had to preface that so hard, but they go to the USJ, right? And once they are there, the Hero 13 goes on to explain what it is to be a hero and how quirks are dangerous. Nobody pays attention to that speech because it's the most boring thing in the world, and Izuku instead notices Kurogiri's portal opening. He begins to ask if villains were invited, and Aizawa immediately jumps down, only to pretty much tell everybody, those are real villains. Suddenly, Izuku gets teleported alongside Mineta and Tsuyu, and she would pretty much end up saving them from the boat. Immediately, Izuku just looks towards the direction of the villains in the water, and he immediately jumps down there as he punches one good time into the water, and all the water that was in that section would pretty much get flung out everywhere like a tsunami, as it shoots the villains out of the water, and it even ends up hitting the direction of Aizawa, the villains, Shigaraki, and Kurogiri. So all of them are just sent flying back by this huge wave of tsunami that hurts all of them, and Tsuyu and Mineta were on the boat as it was rocking, and Izuku would just leave a crater in the earth as he then looks towards the direction of the main villain, Shigaraki, and he then thinks to himself that that's the main big bad. He would immediately blitz towards his direction as he grabs him and throws him far away into the side of like a wall, as Shigaraki pretty much ricochets off of it and falls to the ground, being shaken up as Kurogiri teleports in front of him and ends up teleporting Shigaraki away. Suddenly, the Nomu would be in front of Izuku, and it would throw a punch at Izuku's face, as Izuku would simply stand there in Superman style and then say, funny, as he then goes on to pretty much uppercut the Nomu one good time, finally showing how overpowered his abilities truly are, and then suddenly use Black Whip as he grabs the Nomu and doesn't even let it fly out the building. He then smashes it back down onto the ground, flies up one good time for extra measure, and uses Fa Jin, his ability to essentially multiply his strength, to activate a 100% punch times 2 as he comes down onto the Nomu and punches it straight in the head, destroying it, pretty much annihilating the Nomu's head as he leaves a crater so massive in the earth that it will not get patched up for weeks. And Izuku then looks towards the direction of his classmates, who are all shocked, and Bakugo is just astonished. He's wondering where all this power was when they were growing up, and where did it come from? Everybody begins to wonder what's going on, and it's at this moment that All Might shows up, only to see that everything has pretty much been handled by Izuku, and the couple of villains that were left pretty much ended up running for the hills as soon as they saw Izuku perform what he had just done. All Might would smile at Izuku and begin to pretty much pat him on the back, laughing, being like, ha 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 ha, you know what I mean? And then Izuku and All Might go off for lunch, as the police officers clean up everything, and the USJ incident would pretty much be patched up, just like in the original. Cue 1 week break, and suddenly we find ourselves in the UA Sports Festival tournament bracket, where Izuku is now going to actually have to face off against Shinso for the first round. Now, why am I not mentioning the UA race or the cavalry battle? Well, that's simple, because the UA race would clearly be won by Izuku, and the cavalry race would actually be won by Izuku against. Surprise, surprise. When it comes to the battle between Deku versus Shinso, this would be a little bit of a funny moment, seeing as Shinso just looks at him and he's like, must be nice to be able to have all this power, yada yada yada, right? And Shinso's thinking to himself that he won once Izuku talks back. But just like in the original, his power would pretty much save him, and Izuku would just flick Shinso out of the arena, sending him flying out and knocking him out, as everybody's just shocked at the power of Izuku, and they begin to cheer his name, Izuku, Izuku, Izuku. Cue his next opponent, Todoroki. And just like in the original, he begins to ask if he's All Might's secret love child. And after Izuku hears this, he breaks down into laughter. He laughs in Todoroki's face, and Todoroki gets angry at this, walking away as Bakugo's sitting around the corner, and he then walks into that same hallway to ask Izuku why he got so powerful all of a sudden. Izuku looks at Bakugo and says, "Look, Bakugo, I don't gotta tell you anything, especially after all those things you did to me all those years." And Bakugo would grit his teeth as he holds Izuku by the arm and tells him, "Wait. When we meet in the finals, I want you to know, I'm gonna crush you, Deku." As from here, he lets go and then walks off. And Deku would then go on to get into the ring with Todoroki, as Todoroki shoots a giant ice geyser at Izuku, who pretty much just flicks it away over and over and over and over, causing snow to begin to fall on the UA arena as Izuku takes steps closer and closer to Todoroki, until eventually he instinctively shoots fire out of his fire side. And once Izuku notices Todoroki's holding back, Izuku would look to him as he would say, "You're holding back on me?" And Todoroki would say, "I can't use that side of my power. You wouldn't understand." Izuku then looks to him and then starts breaking out into laughter, as he then points to the crowd and says, "Every one of them is doing their best job, so you better not hold off on me," telling him that it's his quirk, not his dad's, as Todoroki flares up with his fire in his eyesight. And Izuku then immediately looks at that direction as he thinks, "I can't let that power go off, because if it does, it might harm the people watching in the stands." So Izuku blitzes at Todoroki and hits him in the stomach one good time, knocking him out and knocking the wind out of Todoroki as he just, you know what I mean? Like he has one of those moments. And Deku just pretty much goes on to hold him as he says, "You would have done great, but not here, Todoroki." As he, puts him on the ground, and everybody begins to cheer Izuku's name. Following this, we would have Deku versus Todoroki, which would be a one-sided massacre. He humbles Bakugo, mind you. Bakugo went into this battle talking all the schmack, being like, "Izuku, you really the weakest one of UA, right?" He starts telling him about how weak he is, how he really got no reason to be there, and, how he's going to destroy him. And as soon as the ding 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 went off, Izuku just blitzed at Bakugo, hit him a couple good times, slapped him around, and pretty much pulled a Goku on Frieza, where he starts slapping him over and over, and Bakugo could not do a single thing about it. Eventually, Bakugo shot an explosion at Deku, but Deku simply did not care. He did not have a single care in the world for any of the things that Bakugo was shooting at him at that moment. And Izuku then decided, alright, it's time to end this, as he suddenly decides to use one of his newer based quirks, the final quirk that comes with One for All, which I'm going to be saying is probably some energy beam, like blaster thing or something like that, right? He shoots like these energy key balls things, and it ends up pretty much sending Bakugo flying out of the arena and knocking him out, leading to Izuku being the eventual winner of the entire USJ event and basically getting the first place medal, with Bakugo in second and Todoroki in third. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how the UA Sports Festival bracket tournament pretty much ends up being wrapped up by yours truly. What ends up happening following this is going to be a little bit of the Stain arc, but I don't really think that anything too specific is going to be changing there. I mean, we have the scene where Izuku chooses his name. That doesn't really change. We have the scene where Izuku meets Gran Torino. Izuku's going to get beat on by Gran Torino because he's going to tell him not to use his quirk and to learn more self-defense. And yeah, When he ends up making his way towards the town and he ends up inevitably running into the hero killer Stain, what ends up happening instead of what happens in the original happening is essentially Izuku was able to pretty much withstand the hero killer so easily and just speed blitz him to the point where taking out Stain was pretty much a walk in the park for Izuku. He used fog, he used his smoke screen and immediately blitzed behind Stain, catching him off guard and actually making Stain lick his own blood, after realizing that his quirk allows him to paralyze people. He does this and throws Stain into the cop car before rushing at the Nomus that were rampaging in the city and pretty much single-handedly defeating 2 of them, as news outlets were pretty much recording everything that was going down, and Izuku would start going viral all over the news, with everybody calling him the next #1. People saying that he's an even better version of All Might, with other people, who have All Might nostalgia still, saying that he'll never come close, that Izuku's just a cheap ripoff, and you guys get the point. There's a division between the people, where some people love him, some people hate him. But one thing that would happen would All Might would actually come out and say that Izuku is going to have more potential than him. And that pretty much seals the deal. Everybody now loves Izuku Midoriya, and he's just going viral all over the news. Following this event, we pretty much have the final exams, which essentially just consist of a written portion test, and then suddenly we're followed by a physical part, where Izuku has to actually face All Might one-on-one. A fight that would actually be broadcasted on national television. Now, Izuku, being the respectful Chad that he is, would let All Might defeat him, and make it look as legit as possible, so people still think that All Might is, well, the top dog. It's his idol. He's not going to embarrass All Might in front of millions of people. But he does make himself look good by landing a couple of punches that, kind of hurt All Might a little bit. Izuku was holding back heavily. He was only using about 30 to 40% against All Might, so that's why All Might was able to defeat him, going all out without the, the weight restriction things, right? But after this little fight goes down, everybody just kind of begins to pretty much praise Izuku, and he's just known as that OP character with some incredible powers, who's not cocky, who's actually humble, just due to the fact that his mom is Inka Midoriya. That said, following these little interactions, we now get the mall scene where Shigaraki, shows up and he grabs Izuku by the neck, and he's like, "Oh, we're old friends." That happens, but instead of what would have happened in the original, Izuku, as soon as he has Shigaraki almost grab him by the neck, would instinctively react by elbowing Shigaraki in the stomach, causing Shigaraki not to have enough time to grab him by the neck, and then essentially punch Shigaraki one good time, sending him flying into one of the shops, as he then calls the police, and they grab Shigaraki, thanking Izuku for his service. Shigaraki gets thrown into prison, and Izuku just laughs as they all go to the forest training camp, where the next arc is now going to commence. To immediately jump off the next arc on a high note, we pretty much start the essential forest training camp arc. And the way that this pretty much goes is a ton of very strange interactions between the teachers and Izuku all together. What essentially ends up going down is pretty much Izuku, as soon as he gets to the forest training camp area and the pro hero ends up throwing them off the mountainside, Izuku just looks towards the direction of all of the monsters that are in front of them, and what he does next shocks the entire classroom. He goes on to pretty much crack his knuckles and neck and then say, "Well, let's get started," as he then pretty much blitzes in and begins to essentially shatter and just start decimating, breaking, and pretty much making all of the robots look bad. He's playing with them like children, bruh. It's not even funny, because this man Izuku is just tearing through them like they are nothing, bro. He's tearing through them like your dad would when you were growing up with the belt. That's how bad Izuku's going off with this thing, right? And basically what ends up essentially happening is they make it to the the camp about an hour earlier, pretty much around the same time that it would have taken the pros to make it there, because I'm pretty sure Aizawa said they would have made it there by 12, but they didn't account for that. So they make it there at 12, and then the wild cats end up essentially making them food, cooking for them, and telling them that they better not get used to this, because the next couple of days they're here, they're doing the cooking. Everybody immediately starts to pretty much begin conversing within one another, and eventually Koda comes up to Izuku. Izuku doesn't even bother looking at him because the kid already looks troubled. He looks like he does not want a convo. But who does go up to him? Kaminari. Kaminari goes up to him and gets hit in the nuts. And when Kaminari falls, everybody starts laughing. But after that small little interaction happens, what pretty much ends up happening later in the day is Izuku runs into Koda once again, right? He runs into Koda once more, and once he does actually end up running into Koda, he pretty much goes on to tell him that, he should be more careful. And by running into Koda, I mean saves his life, because, he falls off after he looks at the girls, and, he passes out due to a nosebleed, right? But after all of that is said and done, he ends up getting Koda's backstory, and he kind of feels bad for the kid, thinking that it must suck to not grow up with parents. But what sucks more? Not having a quirk. So yeah, get off your high horse, Koda. Anyways, though, Deku doesn't say that outright, but he thinks that, you know what I mean? And then eventually the next day comes around, and what should happen? Okay, so realistically, Class 1B ends up arriving the very next day, if not later in the day of the second day. So what I'm going to be saying essentially happens just for plot convenience is as soon as Class 1B arrives and Class 1B watches what Class 1A is doing in terms of training, they begin to pretty much start shitting on Class 1A, calling them weak and saying that the only strong person in their class is Deku. Once that's all said and done, Aizawa goes on to actually say, you know what, you do have a point. He is the strongest one out of all the students. I'd propose something. My student versus all of yours and all of mine. Whoever wins has to pretty much, give the students to the other teacher for an entire day to save themselves an entire day of teaching. And, Vlad King just looks at Aizawa and immediately goes, oh, you're on. As from here, he goes on to essentially look at his students and tell them, look, for this time, you're going to have to work with Class 1A. I know it's hard, but do it. Everybody, nods their head and they're like, right. And then suddenly Class 1B and Class 1A look at Deku as he charges one for all within himself, and a rainbow-like aura would pretty much begin to emanate off of Izuku's direction as he blitzes at each and every single one of them and begins to essentially start dismantling them at their core. All of their powers against all of his could not match up any worse. All of them tried their absolute hardest, but all of them trying to work together actually made it worse because they could not form, how do I put this, a cohesive unit that actually was moving as they were one. Instead, they were all pretty much trying their best to stand out and doing their own things separate of the group that is supposed to be working together. So they kind of ended up becoming each other's detriment, but more on that when we get to that point. That said, what basically ends up going on following this point in time is essentially we get a point where Izuku just kind of goes on to decimate the classroom and pretty much leave them alone, stopping the absolute decimation of them once he finally feels that they've had enough. And eventually after that little situation, we get the nighttime situation, which pretty much was the forest training incident. However, Shigaraki this time around isn't the one that leads it. Instead, it's actually all for one. And the reason that he's going towards the forest is not because he wants to capture Bakugo, but because he wants to actually kill Izuku Midoriya before he becomes a problem. So he launches a full-scale attack to find Izuku, and while Izuku's with Koda, pretty much trying to make him feel better, Muscular comes in out of nowhere and then starts laughing because, he found Deku, the main kid, and he, starts bulking up and then, laughing in Deku's face, pretty much telling him that he's weak and that he's not going to do nothing, only to then find himself inside of a side of a mountain crater with his face caved in as Izuku just punched the dude one good time and sent him flying into the mountainside. And he then grabbed Koda and took him towards Aizawa, only to speed blitz into the forest and immediately find the villain Mustard, take him out, and then rush towards the direction of Dupliarms, right? Yes, Dupliarms. He rushes to the direction of Dupliarms and saves him using one of its quirks by letting his aura flare out so much that the light it produced pretty much made Fumikage's dark shadow go away. And after that situation, they ran into Bakugo and Todoroki, then into Uraraka and Tsuyu, and after a bit of, pretty much like trying to get their themselves together, the villain known as Mr. Compress, right? Yeah, Mr. Compress ends up pretty much arriving onto the scene and essentially asking if Izuku Midoriya could come out and play. This is when it's revealed that Izuku was pretty much inside one of the little orbs, and it would suddenly start shaking in Mr. Compress's hand as he begins to wonder what's going on. This has never happened before. He's too powerful, he says. He can't contain him. And Izuku breaks out of it suddenly to pretty much beat down on Mr. Compress. And then out of nowhere, we see the image of All For One appear as he looks on to the direction of Izuku and begins to clap maniacally, as he then informs him that that was the last time he's ever gonna get in his way, that he's gonna get rid of him before he becomes a problem. Just the way he should have with All Might. As he then goes on to pretty much reveal to all who were present there that Izuku's the successor of All Might, and Izuku then thinks to himself, well, no use in hiding it now, as he says, one for all, full Calling! As he then pretty much blitzes towards the direction of One For All, and with one good punch, he pretty much shatters the shield barrier that All For One would have placed in front of him, only to be sent flying back by All For One, who pretty much ended up using his own quirks to block the attack. Izuku then began using Fajin, and once he activated 100%, he began moving on the battlefield so fast that he would leave after images that All For One would shoot attacks at, leaving All For One's guard to be down just long enough for Izuku to land such a powerful blow that it would literally pretty much like leave All For One as a cripple for life. He punches his face so hard, he practically destroys all the nerves in his face, and then goes on to pretty much absolutely destroy All For One's body, making it so that All For One couldn't move from anywhere from the neck down, and All For One was pretty much taken out so fast and so savagely by Izuku that everybody watching was just thinking to themselves that that might have been a little overkill. But Izuku would say that All Might told him about him, and he's actually the greatest villain in the world, before all of them understand why Izuku had to do what he did, and he then goes on to inform the rest of the teachers that everybody else has been taken care of. All of the villains would be taken in, and the League of Villains would essentially be no more. After All For One pretty much used his final card to try to, do what he was doing, it all failed. The final attempt that the villains would try, however, would be a full-scale Nomu attack with all of the Nomus that they have. But after this situation, the heroes would have went over to look for the Nomu. So before all the Nomus could actually be awakened, All Might and the rest of the heroes would actually destroy them, and Dr. Ujiko would have nothing but Kurogiri to fall back on to get away and suddenly, try to start from square one once again. That said, after all that happens, the Provisional Hero License arc would be right around the corner, and I'm not even going to pretend like this is going to be a hard thing whatsoever, but there is one moment that I do want to, pretty much talk about. You guys remember that moment when UA was, in the Provisional Hero License, they get given the balls and they have like their 3 lives on them, right? And then everybody else rushes at the direction of UA and they try to throw their balls at them. Well, instead of that happening in the original, Izuku, when he sees a huge amount of students rushing at them, he would immediately jump into the air and essentially kick out towards the direction of all of the students that were trying to target them, sending them all flying back with just the gust of wind from his kick, and leading all of the balls to go flying back towards the directions and eliminate a ton of them, leading to Izuku getting a bunch of points that he would have never gotten otherwise and pretty much passing off rip. Then going on to essentially do his thing when it comes to the rescue portion of the Provisional Hero License exam, winning without any fuss. Oh, and should I mention, Deku versus Kacchan doesn't actually end up happening, just due to the fact that Kacchan already knows that Deku is just far superior to him. So now we essentially just jump into the Overhaul Arc, which is pretty much almost the same as it would be in the original, except for one small event, which would be the battle between Izuku and Mirio at the very beginning of the Overhaul Arc. Now this time around, Mirio stands absolutely no chance. Regardless of how fast Mirio is and how much misdirection he uses, Izuku's just too fast, and he's able to actually outclass Mirio with so much speed that Mirio just was impressed. And when he ended up meeting Sir Night-Eye actually gave him the respect that Izuku deserved in the original, actually stamping his thing, knowing that no matter what he does, Izuku will always come out on top. This would lead us to the situation with Eri, and much like they would have in the original with, Izuku and Mirio running into Eri, they still would do so, just in this time, things would be a little different, because Overhaul would be able to recognize the boy known as Izuku Midoriya, who has been shown to throw hands with All Might himself. Not only that, but Mirio Togata, who he's not really too sure of, is probably a third-year student. So he realizes that there's 2 pretty powerful people in front of him. He ends up taking off his glove and letting out a little bit of blood of bad intent, I guess. bloodlust. Yeah, he lets out a little bit of bloodlust, right? And, you know, Eri gets scared and has to, you know, begin to get off of Deku and rush back to him. But it's at this moment that Deku immediately is like, I'm not letting you go. And he holds Eri strong with, you know, with one arm as he gives her to Mirio, and then, you know, looks towards the direction of Overhaul. As Overhaul would blink, being confused, and would fall to the ground, not knowing what happened, but it would have literally felt as if a train had ran over him. And you guys might be wondering, what train? Where did the train? What are you talking about, Zether? Well, let me explain. Izuku moved so fast that Overhaul was not able to even register what was going on before he finally collapsed to the ground and was taken out by one of Izuku's brand new moves, which was called the fake flash, which is basically where he baits them into thinking he's moving slow and then begins to pretty much blitz them at speeds that they can't even comprehend. That would lead to the Overhaul house being essentially raided after they find out about Eri being mistreated, and then they would end up pretty much defeating one of the last final villains of the series, leading to that kind of being a little bit of an ending to the series, because after that we pretty much just have the UA Festival arc, the Pro Hero arc, and the Joint Training Hero arc. After this, we basically just have all the UA students going on normal adventures in UA and not actually having to deal with a villain organization festering with them throughout the next couple of years. Izuku goes on to become the #1 hero in about 4 years, and that's all she wrote. Izuku becomes a powerhouse, and this time around, he doesn't get treated like some outsider or a nerd. Izuku takes his rightful place as the most powerful character in My Hero Academia. And if you guys enjoyed today's video, make sure you guys actually go check out the link down below that actually will take you guys to some very, very fire and dope anime merch that you guys can get. Now, it's not the original merch because it really only offers shorts, but let me tell y'all boys, these shorts are the best shorts. I own like 10 pairs of them, ranging from the Demon Slayer set to the One Piece set to, wait, actually no, that's it. I only have Demon Slayer and One Piece shorts because they're so nice, seriously. They look nice, they feel nice, the quality is amazing, and you guys can even get an extra 10% off if you guys use my affiliate link down below in the description, which is literally just my name, all capitals, Zether. That said, if you guys enjoyed today's video, make sure to leave a like and check out the link down below, as you know, it'll help your boy out a ton. Oh, and also, if you want to see pictures of what these shorts look like, you can go back to the video and, you know, check the part where I was talking about them to see what the shorts actually look like, because I'll probably edit it in there. That said, I love each and every single one of you guys. It has been your boy Zether, and I'm out. Peace.